The black sphere was small, no bigger than a human fist, but its impact on the crew of the mining ship Vanguard was catastrophic. It had been buried deep within the crust of a forgotten planet, untouched by time for eons. But the moment they discovered it, everything changed. Dr. Alan Pierce, the ship's lead scientist, stood before the sphere in the dimly lit research lab. His fingers hovered over the holo interface, unsure of how to proceed. "It's like nothing I've ever seen before," he muttered. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from awe. The material was unlike any known alloy, darker than a starless void, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The ship's captain, Commander Harla Voss, leaned over his shoulder, her expression taut. "Can it be safely transported?" Pierce's lips thinned. "I don't know. I've never encountered anything that could generate such energy fluctuations without any discernible power source." Just as Harla opened her mouth to ask another question, the sphere activated. A deep hum resonated through the ship's hull, vibrating the walls and sending a wave of dread through the crew. Every screen flickered, and the ship's systems sputtered as the artifact emitted a pulse. The Vanguard sensors went haywire, readings flashing erratically. "Something's happening," shouted one of the crew members. "The ship's going down." Suddenly, a voice, not from the ship's comms but directly in their minds, echoed through the room, a cold, calculating tone that reverberated in their bones. "The Devourer stirs. The shield must rise." The crew froze, eyes wide in terror. The voice was alien, ancient, yet somehow familiar, like a memory they couldn't recall. Harla grabbed her head, as if the words were physically splitting her skull. The crew staggered back as the intensity of the pulse increased, and every electronic device on the ship shut down. "Power systems are failing," shouted the engineer, his voice rising in panic. "We can't maintain orbit. We're—" Before he could finish, the Vanguard lurched. The power grid surged back to life, but not under human control. The ship's systems hummed to a different rhythm, one that was not their own. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything went still. The artifact sat innocently on the table, its black surface unyielding and calm, as if nothing had transpired. But the silence in the room was deafening. "What the hell was that?" one of the crew members whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. "Get it out of here," Harla ordered, her voice shaky but commanding. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, an instinctive sense of dread sinking in like lead. Now. But it was too late. In a distant sector of space, a massive force, something older, darker, and far more terrifying than anything the galaxy had ever known, shifted in response to the artifact's call. It had sensed the first stirrings of a resistance, and it was coming. The Aegis slipped silently through the void, its sleek frame cutting through the dark with barely a whisper. Captain Mira Solis stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of the abandoned system ahead. Her crew was tense, their usual banter replaced by quiet murmurs and the hum of machinery. This wasn't a typical mission. It was a race against an unknown, something that had already shattered the civilizations that came before them. "Estimated arrival in 5 minutes," said Lieutenant Caravance, the ship's navigator. "No signs of activity, just wreckage, lots of it." Mira nodded, her face grim. The signal from the artifact had led them here, to a barren sector of the galaxy known for its silence. The record suggested it was once home to a flourishing civilization, the Voltorans, a species of advanced warriors who had vanished hundreds of years ago. But they were not the only ones. The Aegis was now the only ship daring enough to venture into a region once feared for its uncanny silence. No distress signals had been picked up. No reports of battles. Just nothing. "Scan for anomalies," Mira ordered. "The artifact may have attracted more than just our attention." Vance's fingers flew across the controls, sending out pulses of energy through the system. "I'm not seeing any immediate signs of the Devourer's approach, Captain, but I'm picking up a lot of scattered debris, large ships, some in pieces." Mira's brow furrowed. Ships don't just fall apart without a reason. Get me a full analysis, Lieutenant. Seconds later, the display shifted, revealing a shattered fleet of warships, most of them beyond recognition. Pieces of them drifted in the empty space like the remains of forgotten gods. Scattered among the wreckage were signs of a brutal struggle. Burn marks, gouges from weapons far more advanced than anything humanity had ever seen. But there were no bodies, no survivors. They fought something, Mira muttered, her voice tight. But what? Suddenly, the quiet hum of the Aegis was shattered by a blaring alert. Vance's hands shot up in alarm. Captain, energy signatures coming from within the debris field. Something's alive in there. On screen, the view shifted to show a dark, ghostly shape, half a ship, half a weapon, drifting slowly through the wreckage. It was a colossal battleship, its once proud hull now hollowed and crumpled, like a corpse left to rot in the vacuum of space. But it wasn't dead. A faint pulse of blue light flickered across its surface, an energy signature flickering in and out like a dying star. That ship is still operational, Vance whispered. How? Not anymore, Mira said, her voice steely. We're going in. The Aegis approached the ghostly ship, weapon systems ready. Mira's gut told her this wasn't just an abandoned wreck. It was a message, one from the past. Something where someone had left it here, waiting for the right moment to be found. As they docked, the airlock sealed with a hiss. Mira's team, armed and ready, moved swiftly into the derelict ship. The interior was cold and lifeless, walls lined with decaying technology. The further they ventured inside, the more they saw signs of a civilization that had been destroyed by something far beyond even their advanced capabilities. In the captain's quarters, Mira found the remains of the crew, charred, twisted bodies, as if they had been consumed from the inside out. But it wasn't just their bodies that were destroyed. Their minds, too, had been ravaged. Holographic logs flickered to life, displaying the final moments of the Voltoran fleet. We thought we were gods, the last log began, the voice shaky but resolute. But we were nothing. The devourer has consumed us, and now it comes for all. Mira stood in stunned silence, the weight of their fate sinking in. This wasn't just a battle. This was a war for survival, and humanity was the last line of defense. We're next, she whispered, but not without a fight. Mira Salas sat in the briefing room aboard the Aegis, her figure steepled in front of her, eyes scanning the holographic map that hovered before her. A dozen other officers sat around the table, their faces etched with tension, their minds still grappling with the overwhelming implications of what they had just uncovered. The Voltorans had fallen. The galaxy was unprepared. The devourer was coming. According to our calculations, Lieutenant Vance began, her voice steady but laced with unease. We have about 6 months before the devourer's main force reaches this region. It's moving fast, Captain. It consumes everything in its path, adapting as it goes. We're going to be facing something unlike anything we've ever encountered. Mira glanced at the map once more. The devourer's predicted route from the farthest edges of known space was a straight line toward Earth's sector. 6 months. She knew how fast fleets could mobilize, but this wasn't just a fleet. This was an extinction event. How do we stop something that can adapt to any weapon we throw at it? Commander Elias Grant, her second-in-command, asked. His voice was hoarse, and his eyes, usually sharp and confident, betrayed his growing concern. He had seen enough battles to know how dangerous this enemy would be. We don't stop it, Mira replied, her tone colder than she intended. We delay it. We buy time until we can learn more about it. Maybe the Voltorans had a weapon hidden away somewhere. We find that weapon, or we die trying. The room fell silent as the gravity of the situation settled over them. Humanity had fought off invaders before, had conquered its enemies with sheer determination. But this wasn't just another alien species. This was something that had destroyed an entire civilization, and it had the potential to wipe out everything. "We need allies," Mira said, breaking the silence. "The Galactic Council needs to hear about this. We'll need every ship, every force available to stand against the Devourer. We don't have the luxury of doing this alone." "And what if they don't listen?" asked Lieutenant Oren, the communications officer. "The Council is already divided. The alliance with the Drethians is shaky at best. The Korak have their own agenda. If we try to warn them, they may see it as a move to expand human influence, not a call for unity." Mira's lips pressed into a thin line. The politics of the Galactic Council were messy at best. She had fought in skirmishes between factions before, but now, with the galaxy's fate hanging in the balance, she couldn't afford a single distraction. "We make them listen," Mira said firmly. "If they can't see reason, we go over their heads. We bring this to the people. The galaxy doesn't just need another speech, it needs action." A murmur of agreement ran through the officers, but there was no mistaking the weight of Mira's words. The Council had always been hesitant to trust humanity, given their relatively recent ascension as a galactic power. But now it was humanity's time to take charge. Elias leaned forward, rubbing his jaw. "We'll need to move quickly. Any delays could make the difference between surviving this and getting wiped out." "We've been training for this," Mira said, her gaze hardening. "We've been preparing for a fight. Now we need to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." She straightened in her chair, a newfound resolve flooding her system. There was no turning back now. The Aegis was humanity's first line of defense, but it would take more than just one ship to stand against the Devourer. She had to unify the factions, bring together the most powerful forces in the galaxy, and make them realize that they were all in this together, whether they liked it or not. As Mira left the briefing room, she headed toward the ship's command deck. Her heart beat faster with each step, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that was building within her. She had always thrived in the heat of battle, but this battle was unlike any other. This wasn't just a fight for victory, it was a fight for survival. And if humanity was to have any hope of stopping the Devourer, they had to make a stand now, before it was too late. The galaxy was about to be torn apart, and humanity would be at the forefront of the fight to hold it together. The Aegis's engines hummed as Mira Solis paced across the bridge, her mind racing through every contingency, every plan. The crew had worked tirelessly for days, coordinating with various factions, sending out distress calls and gathering intel. Now, they were approaching the Drethian homeworld, an ancient planet rich with resources and teeming with politics. The Drethians, a proud, warrior-like species, had always been reluctant to ally with humanity, especially after the tensions that had flared during the last Galactic Summit. But now they had no choice. Approaching Drithia Prime, Captain, Vance's voice cut through the tension, calm but with an edge of urgency. Mira glanced at the view screen, where the vast purple and gold surface of Drethia Prime loomed ahead, surrounded by the glittering lights of its orbiting defense satellites. Drethian ships, sleek and deadly, patrolled the skies, ensuring that no uninvited guests dared approach without consequence. "No turning back now," Mira muttered to herself as she took her seat. "Prepare to dock. Let's see if we can convince them before they destroy us." Commander Grant raised an eyebrow. "We're not exactly friends with the Drethians, Captain. We might not have the time for diplomacy if things go south." "We don't have the luxury of time," Mira replied. "We either convince them to join us, or we make sure we leave with enough intel to strike on our own." The Aegis glided toward the planet's surface, its engines powering down as it slipped into the docking bay of the Drethian capital ship, Vanguard's Fist, a massive warship known for its intimidating design and unrivaled firepower. The air around the ship crackled with anticipation. Mira stood as the airlock hissed open, revealing a small contingent of Drethian soldiers standing at attention, their faces grim and unyielding. At the front was Commander Valek, a towering figure with a reputation for ruthlessness. His armor gleamed in the artificial light, and his golden eyes locked onto Mira with a piercing intensity. Mira Solis, Valak greeted her with a curt nod, his voice deep and gravelly. "You have our attention. Speak quickly, human. We don't have time for your politics." Mira held his gaze, her voice unwavering. "I didn't come to beg for your alliance, Commander. I came to tell you the truth. The Devourer is coming. It has wiped out entire civilizations. It adapts, it evolves, and it will destroy everything. The galaxy is at the edge of annihilation, and humanity needs your help." Valak's gaze faltered for just a moment, but it was enough for Mira to catch the shift. The Drethians had always seen themselves as the apex warriors of the galaxy, unwilling to admit weakness, especially to a race as young as humanity. But the mention of the Devourer, something ancient, beyond comprehension, seemed to stir something deep within him. "You ask for an alliance, but what can your species offer us?" Valak's tone was skeptical, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe fear. Fear of the unknown. Mira's expression hardened. "We offered you survival. The galaxy is fracturing, and no one can stand alone. The Devourer is not a foe to be defeated with weapons alone. It's a force of nature. We need to unite, or there will be nothing left to fight for." Valak crossed his arms, his gaze shifting as he considered her words. "And what makes you think the Drethians would lower themselves to fight alongside a lesser species? You haven't earned that privilege." Mira stepped closer, her voice low but firm. "You don't get to choose the enemy, Valak. The Devourer isn't going to discriminate. It will take you just as quickly as it will take us. If you want to survive, you'll need to change your thinking. This isn't about your pride. It's about the survival of every species in the galaxy." There was a long silence before Valak spoke again, his voice softer now. "And what do you expect from us in return?" "Your ships, your warriors, your technology. We need every resource we can get to stand a chance. But most of all, we need to trust each other. The Devourer won't stop at Drethia. If we fail, it will consume everything, leaving nothing but ash." Valak studied her for a moment longer, then nodded curtly. "You have one chance, Captain Solis. If your claims are true, we will join you. But if this turns out to be some human trick, we will crush you." Mira nodded, relief washing over her. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As Valak turned to leave, Mira's mind already began to race. This was only the first step. The Drethians, proud and fierce, would be invaluable allies, but there were many more factions to convince. Humanity had just made a powerful friend, but they couldn't afford to waste any time. The Devourer was closer than they realized, and now the real fight was just beginning. Mira Solis stood on the bridge of the Aegis, staring at the holographic map that flickered before her. The alliance with the Drethians was in place. Commander Valak had promised his fleet's support, but Mira knew the real challenge had only just begun. The Drethians weren't the only species that needed to be convinced. There were dozens of factions, each with their own agendas, their own histories, and their own distrust of humanity. But every single one of them had to be brought to the table. There was no other option. "Captain," Vance called from her station, her voice tense. "We've made contact with the Korak. They're willing to listen, but they're hesitant. They've had problems with the Drethians in the past, and the last thing we need is for a diplomatic incident to derail this." Mira clenched her jaw. The Korak were a warrior race as well, and their rigid code of honor often put them at odds with others. But their fleet was powerful, and their technology was some of the best in the galaxy. They had to be brought in, if not for their soldiers, then for their advanced weaponry. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for perfect conditions," Mira said, her eyes fixed on the flashing communication readout. "Tell them what we know. The Devourer is coming, and it doesn't care about past grudges. If they want to survive, they'll have to get over it." Vance nodded, sending the data to the Korak leadership. I'll let you know as soon as they respond. Mira turned to face the rest of her senior officers, their faces lined with concern but also determination. We're assembling the pieces, but we still need more. The Assyrians have the best intelligence network in the galaxy, but they won't work with us unless we offer them something. The Xandari are technologically superior to any of us, but their arrogance makes them difficult to approach. And then there's the Jintar, who have all the raw resources we'll need, but they'll only cooperate if they see some kind of immediate profit. Elias Grant, her second-in-command, folded his arms. You think we can really pull this off? Each one of these factions has their own interests, their own history. The Korak are already pushing back. We'll be lucky to get the Assyrians on board before the Devourer arrives. We will get them on board, Mira replied firmly. We have no other choice. These species have been at each other's throats for centuries, but right now, they face an enemy that doesn't care about their borders or their ancient grudges. We make them see that. A moment of silence passed before Commander Grant spoke again. I'll coordinate with the Korak. I'll make sure they're fully briefed on what we know, but we'll need more than promises to sway the Assyrians and the Xandari. They won't give us their fleets just because we ask. Mira nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. I know. We'll have to give them something they can't resist. If the Assyrians want information, we'll give them the best intel we have. The Xandari, they want new weapons, we'll trade for what we can. But most importantly, we need to remind them of one thing. This isn't about empires or politics anymore. This is about survival. If they refuse to unite, they will be erased. A chime from the communication station interrupted the tense silence. Captain, Vance said, her voice laced with urgency. The Korak have agreed to meet. They're coming to the Aegis in 2 hours, but we need to prepare for their demands. Mira took a deep breath. She'd known the Korak would agree to the meeting. They weren't foolish. The Devourer didn't care about anyone's pride, but the real test would be how far they were willing to go. The Korak were proud warriors, but they would never face the Devourer alone. She needed to use that against them. We'll make them see reason, Mira said, more to herself than to anyone else. Gather the team. This meeting will determine if we have a chance at survival or if we all fall together. As the crew went to prepare for the incoming delegation, Mira's mind raced. Every alliance, every negotiation, every minute spent convincing others was one more step toward preventing total annihilation. But even with all the forces of the galaxy behind them, she knew there was no guarantee they would succeed. And as the ages floated in the void, the reality began to sink in. This wasn't just a battle for power or resources. It was a battle for existence. Humanity had to be the spearhead of this fight, not just for themselves, but for every living creature in the galaxy. And time was running out. The Aegis's bay doors hissed open as the Korak delegation's warship docked. The massive ship was a floating fortress, its sleek exterior adorned with intimidating, spiked armor and ancient runes that pulsed with a faint red glow. As the airlock sealed, Mira stood at the front of the bridge, her back straight and her expression hard as stone. This was a turning point. The Korak were fierce and proud, but they respected strength above all else, and they would need to see that humanity was willing to fight just as hard as they were. Captain, the Korak are here. Vance's voice broke the silence, her tone betraying the tension in the air. They're on their way to the conference room. Mira's pulse quickened. The meeting would determine not just their fate, but the fate of the entire galaxy. She took a deep breath, composing herself. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. The Korak delegation entered the conference room with a heavy silence. At the forefront was Lord Kale, a towering figure with a broad chest armored in obsidian-like plates. His face was sharp, his eyes narrow and calculating, his every movement exuding the raw power of his species. Behind him, a handful of his closest advisors, their armor just as formidable, followed without a word. Mira stood tall, meeting Cal's gaze as he took his seat at the far end of the table. The weight of the moment settled over her. This wasn't just diplomacy, this was a test. A test of humanity's resolve, its strength, and its ability to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds. Lord Cal, Mira began, her voice unwavering, "Thank you for agreeing to meet. We don't have time for pleasantries, so I'll get straight to the point. The Devourer is coming. It has already consumed the Voltoran Empire, and now it's headed this way. If we don't unite, it will destroy everything." Cal's eyes glinted with a dangerous curiosity, but he remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "The Devourer is unlike any enemy we've faced. It doesn't care about borders, alliances, or old feuds. It adapts, learns, and consumes everything in its path. If we don't stand together, we will fall, one by one." Mira paused, letting the gravity of her words hang in the air. The room was silent, the Korak leaders exchanging looks that betrayed their skepticism. Cal leaned forward, his voice low and measured. "And why should we fight beside you, human? You have no place among us. You are young, untested. The Korak have stood alone for millennia, and we have triumphed over all challenges. Why should we risk our honor for a species that still struggles to find its place in the galaxy?" Mira felt the sting of his words, but she didn't flinch. She had known this would be the hardest part. The Korak had a deep sense of pride, and they weren't easily swayed by empty promises. "We may be young," Mira replied, her voice steady, "but humanity has faced extinction before. We have fought battles that seemed impossible. We've come out of wars with nothing but our will to survive, and we have always found a way to adapt." She paused, her gaze unwavering as she met Cal's eyes. "What I offer you is not just an alliance, it's a partnership. The Korak are the greatest warriors in the galaxy. You fight with honor, with strength, but the Devourer will destroy even your might. We don't offer you empty words, we offer you survival. Together, we stand a chance, but alone, we are nothing." Cal studied her for a long moment, his piercing gaze never leaving hers. The silence stretched, the weight of the decision hanging heavy in the air. Finally, he spoke, his voice like a rumble of distant thunder. "Your words are bold, human," Cal said, his tone colder now. "But they do not sway me. What I need to see is your strength. Show me that you are worthy of this alliance. Prove that you have the will to fight, to sacrifice. If you can do that, we will join you. But if you fail, we will leave you to your fate. The Korak do not ally with the weak." Mira's heart hammered in her chest, but she met his gaze with equal intensity. "Then you will see our strength, Cal. You will see it in the blood of those who will stand with us. We will not falter. We will not fail." For a long moment, Cal said nothing. His expression was unreadable, his gaze calculating. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well, Captain Solace, you have your chance. We will test your resolve. But remember, the Korak are unforgiving. Should you falter, there will be no second chance." Mira nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. The test had just begun. The Korak would not be satisfied with words alone. They would demand action, and it was up to her to prove that humanity could stand tall beside them. As Cal and his delegation left the room, Mira exhaled slowly. They had taken a step forward, but the path ahead was still fraught with danger. The Devourer was closing in, and every second counted. But now they had one of the most powerful warrior races in the galaxy on their side. The real fight was about to begin. The Aegis raced through the void, its engines burning bright as it hurtled toward the edge of the Xanteri expanse, a vast stretch of uncharted space that the Devourer had made its hunting ground. Mira stood on the bridge, her hands gripping the railing as the weight of the task ahead pressed heavily on her shoulders. The alliances they had forged, with the Drethians, the Korak, the Assyrians, and the Xandari, had given them a fighting chance. But every moment, every decision, brought them closer to the most dangerous confrontation they would ever face. "Captain, we've received an update from the Korak." Vance's voice cut through the silence, her eyes glued to the communication panel. "They've dispatched a fleet to support us, but they've made it clear this is our fight to lead. They will stand with us, but the final charge must be made by humanity." Mira nodded grimly. The Korak were warriors to the core, and while they would support the final assault, it was clear they wanted to see humanity prove its worth. The other factions had pledged their fleets, but none were as determined as the Korak to ensure this would not be a battle of words, but a battle of strength. Humanity would have to lead this charge, even if it meant sacrificing everything. "We've got no choice," Mira muttered under her breath. "We'll lead. All ships, prepare for battle. Weapon systems online, shields at full strength." "Captain, we're approaching the coordinates," Elias Grant said from his station. He looked up, his eyes narrowed with concern. "Scans show a large concentration of Devourer forces in the region. We'll be walking straight into the heart of the storm." Mira stared at the tactical display. The Devourer wasn't just a single ship or a fleet. It was a force, a massive, ever-evolving entity that consumed entire civilizations. Their scans showed several of its massive, shape-shifting vessels, but what troubled her most was the growing pattern. The Devourer wasn't just attacking, it was adapting. Its ships were evolving on the fly, learning from every attack, every countermeasure they attempted. "This isn't just about firepower anymore," Mira said, her voice cold with determination. "The Devourer has learned too much. It's becoming smarter, faster. We need to outthink it, outmaneuver it. Our fleets won't win this with sheer force alone." Vance's eyes widened. "Are you suggesting we avoid direct combat, Captain Nanetz?" "No," Mira interrupted, her gaze hardening. "We fight, but we do it smart. The Devourer is a predator, and we're playing its game. We need to think like it does. We'll divide our forces. Some of us will engage head-on, drawing its attention, while the rest of us find its weak spots and exploit them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You're planning a bait-and-switch?" "Exactly," Mira replied, her voice sharp. "We draw its attention and keep it focused on one front. While the Devourer's forces are distracted, we strike at its core. We need to hit it where it hurts, its central hive. If we can disrupt the core of its ship network, we might be able to destabilize its control over the others." "The Xandari will hate that strategy," Grant warned. "They'll want to take on the entire force." "I know," Mira said, the weight of the decision hanging heavily on her shoulders. "But this isn't about pride. This is about survival. I'll convince them." A chime echoed through the bridge as a communication from the Xandari came in. Mira stepped forward, her expression resolute as she activated the channel. "Captain Solus," the Xandari emissary said, her voice smooth but laced with authority. "We've reviewed your plan. You intend to divide our forces. That is not how we fight." Mira took a deep breath. She could already hear the familiar pride in the emissary's tone. The Xandari were a highly advanced race, and they valued unity and strength. "I understand your concerns," Mira replied carefully. "But the Devourer isn't a force we can overpower with brute strength alone. We need to be strategic. If we don't disrupt its central core, we risk losing everything." There was a long silence on the other end before the Xandari emissary responded, her voice softer now. "You ask us to trust you, Captain. Your plan is risky, but we will follow your lead, for now." Mira nodded, feeling a surge of relief. "Thank you. We can't afford hesitation. Prepare your fleets. The battle begins now." As the Aegis moved deeper into the heart of the Devourer-controlled space, Mira felt the weight of her choices. The alliances they had forged, the strategy they had crafted, it was all coming down to this final push. They had no room for failure. The Korik's ships were in position, their massive warships flanking the human fleet as the Xandari and Drethian vessels lined up behind them. The tension was palpable. Every ship, every officer, every soldier knew that the battle to save the galaxy had begun. The Devourer ships loomed ahead, a dark and ever-shifting mass of alien technology, seemingly indestructible. Mira stared at the looming threat, her heart racing in her chest. It was time to prove humanity's worth. They would stand and fight, together, or they would fall. The silence on the bridge was deafening as the fleet approached the heart of the Devourer's domain. The Aegis was flanked by the Korok warships, their jagged forms gleaming ominously in the coal black of space. The Xandari ships, sleek and technologically superior, followed in formation behind them, their advanced weapon systems primed for the inevitable onslaught. In the distance, the dark shapes of the Devourer's fleet loomed like predators waiting to strike. Mirasalis stood tall, her gaze fixed on the view ahead. Her breath was steady, but inside, her heart pounded with the weight of what was to come. The plan had been set, and there was no turning back. This was humanity's last chance, not just for survival, but to prove to the galaxy that they belonged among the stars. Captain, Elias Grant's voice broke the stillness. He looked at her, his expression grave. All fleets are in position. We've sent the signal to begin the assault. Mira nodded. Initiate Phase 1. The fleet surged forward as one, engaging the Devourer's outer forces. The Korok led the charge, their ships screaming across the void, firing their massive weapons with precision. The Xandari followed suit, unleashing a barrage of energy weapons that illuminated the darkness like a deadly light show. The Drethians provided a strong support line, their weapons lighting up the skies as they drew fire away from the front lines. But the Devourer was no ordinary enemy. Its ships twisted and contorted, shifting in ways that made them almost impossible to target. It was as if the entire fleet was a living, breathing organism, reacting with terrifying speed and adaptability. Report, Mira barked, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts. Captain, Vance called from the communications station. The Devourer ships are adapting faster than we anticipated. The outer defenses are folding. We're losing ships. Mira's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. We knew this would happen. Stick to the plan. She looked toward the massive holographic display that showed the structure of the Devourer's fleet. At the center of it all was a massive, grotesque structure, its heart a core of ever-shifting organic mass, pulsing with an eerie glow. The weak point. If they could destroy it, they might disrupt the Devourer's control over its ships. Phase 2 now, Mira commanded. The fleet split, half of the forces veering off to draw the Devourer ships away from the central core, while the other half, led by the Aegis, made a direct push toward the heart of the Devourer's fleet. The Korok ships provided covering fire, their weapons blasting apart any ship foolish enough to break through the line. The Xandari added their advanced firepower, targeting key points in the enemy ship's formations. Mira's hands tightened on the armrests of her chair. The Aegis surged forward, its weapons blazing. The Devourer's defenses fought back viciously, sending energy blasts that rocked the ship. Yet, every hit only seemed to fuel their resolve. Status? Mira demanded, her eyes fixed on the tactical readout as the Aegis neared the central mass of the Devourer fleet. We're taking heavy fire, Elias said, his voice calm but strained. Shields are holding for now, but we can't take much more. Mira's eyes flicked to the communication panel, which flashed with the latest messages from the fleet. Their ships were struggling. The Korok were holding, but they were losing vessels at an alarming rate. The Xandari had been forced to pull back after their ships were severely damaged by an unexpected counterattack. We're almost there, Mira muttered to herself. Almost to the heart. A sudden burst of static filled the bridge, followed by a voice, faint but unmistakable, coming through the comms. Mira, this is Vance. We've intercepted their communications. Mira's heart skipped a beat. What's happening? What are they saying? They're sending a signal to something. Bigger, Vance's voice was full of urgency. It's calling for reinforcements. Mira's blood ran cold. The Devourer wasn't alone. It was a part of something far larger, a part of a growing, unstoppable force. And now it was preparing to call in reinforcements that could overwhelm them all. "We don't have time," Mira snapped. "We're pushing through now. Weapons, target the core." The crew of the Aegis rallied, every weapon fired as one, converging on the heart of the Devourer fleet. The massive structure at its center pulsed violently, as if aware of the impending assault. With a final, earth-shaking blast, the Aegis fired its most powerful weapon, a concentrated beam of energy designed to destabilize the core. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden explosion that rocked the entire fleet, the Devourer's core shattered. A wave of energy rippled outward, destabilizing the entire fleet. The remaining Devourer ships began to falter, their once coordinated movements becoming erratic as their central hive collapsed. "Did we do it?" Elias asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Mira's eyes widened as the Devourer ships began to disintegrate, their mass scattering like ash in the wind. The galaxy had won for now. "We did it," Mira whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion, but she knew this victory came at a price. Many lives had been lost in the battle, and the threat had only been pushed back. As the Aegis and the Allied fleet drifted through the wreckage of the Devourer's fleet, Mira's eyes lingered on the stars. This battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The galaxy was far from safe. But humanity had stood tall, and for the first time, the galaxy had witnessed what they were capable of.